Hello, everyone. We're just waiting for the rest of the attendees to arrive and get logged in. So we'll be starting in just a few minutes. Alrighty, I think our numbers are sort of slowing, so a few more people may join us, but I'm gonna kick us off. All right, so welcome everyone to APSA's fourth interactive session of the 2021 to 2022 academic year. We're pleased to host this session with current program directors to answer general questions about the MD, DO, PhD interview process. My name is Anna Kolstad, and I'll be your moderator for the evening. I am a first-year MD PhD student at the University of Rochester, currently in the first year of my MD. Our panelists today, and if each of you could just wave when I say your name so that people can put names to faces. We have Dr. Michael Hadjiagiro, who is the program director at the New York Institute of Technology's DO PhD program. We have Dr. Barbara Kazmierczak, who is the program director at Yale University's MD PhD program. We have Mr. Brian Sullivan, the executive director at Washington University in St. Louis's MD PhD program. And we have Dr. JP Yu, the associate director at the University of Wisconsin-Madison's MD PhD program. To all of the panelists, thank you so much for being here. We're so grateful that you took the time out of your day to come virtually to join us to provide us your pearls of wisdom on interviewing. Okay, so a piece of housekeeping for those of you attending who may have to step away or miss a piece of the session. Just a reminder that we will be recording this session. It should be posted on the APSA website within 1 to 2 weeks. You also all have access to an FAQ document that has been prepared previously by MD PhD director panelists that you can find at bit.ly APSA applicant FAQ, and someone, Daniel, I think will pop that into the chat for you all. Oh, okay. So everyone can see the panelists now, it sounds like. Great, thanks everyone. Okay, so as the moderator, I will remind you to please submit your questions to the Q&A box. We have already received those that some of you have submitted during the registration process, but please feel free to enter further questions into the chat box here on the Zoom call. You can also submit the questions on APSA's Twitter or by emailing Daniel, who has been co-organizing this session with me and with Marina. So the three of us will be working together through the call to facilitate your questions. I think that's all the announcements that I have. Thank you again for all being here with us. And I'm going to go ahead and start with our first question. And for the panelists, before you start answering the first question, if you could give a brief introduction to yourself, that would be great. Alrighty, so our first question, just to start off, is could you each speak a little bit about what the interview format for your program is this year?
I guess I'll start by unmuting myself. And Anna, you might want to call on us just so we know who you want to speak.
Will do.
So I'm representing Yale's program where I'm the director. So I myself am an MD PhD graduate from quite a while ago. I don't want to count up the numbers, but it's close to 25 or 30 years ago. And I've been directing Yale's program for the past 7 years. We have a program with 152 current students. We're located in New Haven. and have PhD candidates in a very broad range of disciplines. So our interview process this year is going to be virtual. It's not very different from what we did last year. And we are going to be using the Zoom format to have students speak with 2 MD interviewers and 2 MD PhD committee interviewers, as well as to have informational sorts of meetings with myself, with other associate directors, with student interest groups. And we're also using the Zoom platform outside of our interview session to basically set up informal interviews for our candidates with scientists of interest.
I'll go next. I'm Brian Sullivan. I'm with the MD PhD program at Washington University in St. Louis. My background is not in science. I'm a Spanish literature degreed person, so I can talk about Borges all day long if you'd like me to. We have about 215 students in the program, and our interview format will be the same as last year. It will all be virtual. You'll have 2 MD interviews, a panel interview with the MSTP committee. So there are about 14 faculty on the committee, and you'll get to spend 20 minutes with the committee talking about your research. And then you'll have informational interviews with faculty whose research you're interested in. And then there will be meetings with students and administrators and so on throughout to give you information about our program.
Dr. Yu, would you like to go next?
Sure. My name is JP Yu. I'm one of the associate directors for the University of Wisconsin MSTP. I'm also an MD PhD. I guess I'm relatively junior. I look like I'm 17, but I promise I've graduated from an MSTP. So the University of Wisconsin MSTP is a little bit smaller than the Washington University or the Yale program. We have a steady state number of maybe about 80 to 85 students in our program. And so, one of the things that we can always talk about later is how do you think about program size and the type of sort of physician scientist community that you want to find yourself. And so I think that's also very important to think about. But like the other schools, we're also going to be virtual this year. It's going to be very much like it was last year. We have essentially approximately 6 formal interviews with either members of our MD PhD admissions committee, MD admissions, as well as faculty scientific interviews with potential mentors that you might be interested on campus. And then we have our interviews set out over maybe 1.5 days, and you get the chance to meet with other students and other faculty members that are in your area of interest.
Okay, so my name is Michael Hadjiargiru. I have a PhD in molecular and cell biology. I'm not a physician scientist. And our program is very young. We started our program about 3 years ago. We have 10 students. We want to purposely keep the program small. So we basically admit 3 students a year, 2 to 3 students a year, basically. Our format for the interview process is also virtual at this point. So we have a small committee of about 5 faculty members that interview the candidates. It's about an hour interview. And we do not have interviews with faculty that the students are interested in. Once we accept the students into the program, then once they come here, they can meet with the individual faculty members. We have all of the research interest of all the participating faculty members on our website. So I basically point out to the candidates that they can look up exactly the research, and even the projects are listed there as well. We also have our current students in there and with whom they work as well.
Thank you all. Our next question is, we had several attendees wondering, what are some of the qualities that make an applicant stand out in their interviews? And if someone...
Should we go in the same order again?
Sure, yeah,
So we'll keep it the same way.
that sounds good.
Okay, so that's my punishment for speaking out first. I think that in the application process, both in the paper form and also in the interview, we're really looking for somebody who can tell us about themselves and why they're so interested in committing a lot of their life to training as a physician scientist. And in particular, we're excited to learn what it is that excites you about this process. What are your sorts of ambitions for, the career you'll have, the impact you'll have, the mark you're going to make as a physician scientist. And the better that you can communicate that, the more excited we are. We like people who are creative and curious. We like people who have new ideas about how they're going to sort of bring some sort of discipline of science, broadly defined, or scholarship to bear on improving the health of people broadly. So that's what we're looking for, and that's what makes people stand out.
Well, Barbara, one advantage to going first is you can answer the question, leave us with little left to say, but I will try to add something of value to that. I think a couple things is we like to see students really excited about their work, but not only their work, but also to be curious about other people's work. And so when you're interviewing with various faculty, we hope that you're able to ask them questions, even if it's outside your area of expertise. You should approach it as an opportunity to learn something about an area that you're less familiar with, because we are looking for that curiosity and the real desire to know more. One other thing I'll say is, and this can get applicants in trouble, is not being able to admit that they don't know the answer to a question. So when you're asked about your research, if you reach a point where you don't know the answer, you should be real honest and just admit to that, because, and it's not like you're doing a qualifying exam or anything like that. We realize that you can't know everything, and the fact is you probably know more than the faculty member who's interviewing you. So you should just be upfront and admit that you can't answer the question. You could speculate on an answer if you'd like, but just make sure that the interviewer knows that you are speculating rather than stating something that to be fact.
This is going to be really hard going at the end because we're not going to have much more to add. I think just one quick comment that I would add is, on paper, it's really hard to distinguish one applicant from another. I mean, all of you are just really, truly outstanding applications, or have outstanding applications. So really the interview is the opportunity for us to learn about you and what really makes you tick, what really gets you excited. And as Barbara was really pointing out, is really sharing with us your excitement and your passion and your vision for science, your work as a physician, and then how you sort of imagine that your overall career is going to meld the two. And I think most of the really successful applications and applicants that we see are the ones that really can answer, that particular question and communicate that really clearly and powerfully.
Can I just say ditto to all that has been said? Essentially, there is no magic formula here. It's exactly all the same things that have been said that we look for as well. We want somebody who's going to be excited doing research and has a clear idea and direction as to where they want to go with this dual degree education, basically.
Thank you. I guess on the flip side of that, are there any common mistakes that you see applicants make in their interviews? Or any sort of pitfalls that people run into?
I was going to let Brian go first, so everyone else has a chance to be the first person as well as the last person.
Mr. Sullivan, I think you're muted.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, so in addition to the point I made earlier about not being able to admit when you don't know something, I think a mistake would also be to be narrowly focused in what, when asked what you want to do your research for your PhD, right? I think it's important that you do show that you're open and flexible, because there's no telling what you might be become interested in through the medical curriculum. And we've seen some individuals who are, we think they're going to track a certain way, like go into neuroscience, and then all of a sudden they end up going into genetics or something like that. So I think it's, if you come in really sort of narrowly focused, it will cause our faculty to wonder, how open you are to new ideas. And so I think that may be a mistake that I've seen sometimes in applicants.
I think one common area that applicants misplace emphasis on the research and the PhD portion of their MSTP application. And I think they lose sight of the physician component. And, I can't speak for all MSTP programs, but at least I know for us here at Wisconsin, we take the MD portion very seriously, and we're very interested in what are your individual motivations for pursuing medicine. And also, what are the individual characteristics that make up you as a person that we see during the interview day? So, all those sort of behaviors and communications that speak to character, to resilience, to empathy, we take all of those into consideration, because we don't want to train just scientists and we don't want to train just physicians. We want to train the whole package. So applicants misplace a lot of emphasis on just the science and sort of shove the MD part to the side. So I would make sure you keep that in mind.
Sometimes what I notice also is that students don't take the time to read the research interest that the program offers, and they start talking about their own research interests, which are not going to be feasible to be achieved within the context of the faculty members that are part of the program. And I think that's a mistake. If you're applying to a program, you should look at the research interest of the faculty that you will be training with, and you should speak about that, not something that's not going to be relevant. So for example, if we have all basic scientists in the program and you want to do clinical research, well, that's not going to be feasible, right? So that's a mistake that I see sometimes in applications.
Right. I'll piggyback on that and just say that you should know something about the people that you're going to talk to. Usually you find out the names of your interviewers well before the interview date. So it's nice to know a little bit about the stated department or area of interest at your school, and to be able to tell us why we're a good match for you. That would be one thing. And then I think the other general comment I'd make is don't try to say something that you think the people interviewing you want to hear. We really don't have a perfect candidate in mind that we're looking for. We really want to get to know you. And I would say it's probably better for all of us to be quite honest and open about ourselves during the process, because it's horrible to end up someplace for 7 or 9 years under false pretenses.
All right. I guess narrowing down a little bit, I think it might be helpful to some of the applicants just to get a sense of some examples of questions that you like to ask in interviews or at your program that you guys like to ask.
You're asking us to give away the secret sauce. So one question that I'm always really, really interested in asking my interviewees is to have them tell me about a time that they failed. And the more spectacular the failure, the more interested I'm in. I think everybody's application is all about putting your best foot forward and sharing all of your accomplishments and all of your achievements. And those are fantastic. But I think what really interests me is how you react to failure and how you bounce back, and how did you handle it? What did you learn from that situation? And how did you grow as a person, as a scientist, or as a growing, budding physician from that? And I think you would be astounded at the range of answers that I get from that. So it's always a very, very interesting question that I like to ask.
Along with that one, I also like to ask about the strengths, what students perceive that their strengths are. And then when they talk about the strengths, then I flip it over and I like to ask them about their weaknesses to see whether they feel like they have weaknesses. And sometimes when you do that, all sorts of interesting information comes out from the candidates that is very valuable for us as interviewers to be able to read into it to some extent and make a decision. So that's something besides all the other questions that we ask. I like to ask that question basically.
I think you'll get as many sort of questions as we have interviewers, but one thing that I've noticed, at least from many of our MD PhD faculty, is that they're really interested in your science. So you should be totally prepared. Everyone's nodding, this is an obvious thing, but I think it's important to say you should really be prepared to kind of dig in to what you've done, and not be surprised if somebody's actually asking you, what would be the next experiments that you'd be excited to do? Or did something else along related to your project happen that, is relevant? And I think it's rather off-putting to many of them to hear, well, that was being done by a different student, so I don't actually know much about it. We really want a colleague who's kind of going to be excited and curious about research. And that's the sorts of questions that you'll get asked.
I'll piggyback on Barbara, and that's really important. I think, in talking about your science, being able to talk about that next step and what you would do next. If the interviewer may say, well, if you did this and achieved this result, how would you approach it? What would be the next step? Being able to do that is important. And I will say that I've noticed I've been doing MD PhD now for 28 years, running the program here. And there is a definite sort of Gaussian distribution in terms of performance on interviews. And the first, if it's your first or second interview, you don't know about these questions, right? Or you haven't been confronted with enough. By the time you get a third interview, you think, well, my two other interviews, they asked me this question, so this must be important. And so you come up with an answer for it. And then, towards the end of the interview cycle, in your 9th or 10th interview program you visited, it can be you're kind of worn out as you may not perform as well. But I do think being prepared for that, practice with people in your lab, graduate students or something like that, to help you learn how to answer the tough questions, and make sure they don't go easy on you. You want them to be tough on you.
That leads us in well to our next question, which many applicants had posed to us, which is, how do you recommend applicants prepare for their interviews?
Well, I always tell students that graduate at the undergraduate level that they should be themselves. They should not try to be who they're not, right? They should be very comfortable. They should be honest. And as Dr. Sullivan said before, if they don't know an answer, you can say, I'm sorry, I don't know the answer. We don't expect you to have all the answers. Honesty is usually the best policy, right? And also to make eye contact, right? I think that's very important. When you speak to someone, you look at them in their eyes, right? You don't look down, you don't look left or right, you look at them in their eyes. You're communicating with these individuals. Of course, during a Zoom interview is very difficult because we have a habit of looking at people rather than the camera, like as I'm doing right now. I hate just looking at the camera. I'd rather see the squares because I feel like I'm talking to you. So I think that's very important. Those are the kind of things that I would recommend students to do when they go for the interview. Just be yourself, be who you are.
I think if you're going, I think it's worth preparing. It's always hard to be asked a question and not know how you're going to start answering it. So there's certainly be true to yourself, be genuine, but there are certain types of questions that do get asked, as we've all sort of mentioned. And it would be great for you to maybe have an MD PhD student who's been a mentor of yours, or somebody else who's gone through the interview process, basically mock interview you and see which questions you have a hard time, see which ones you stumble over, and think about why you're stumbling. And maybe you need to kind of come to some internal clarity about what the answer really is.
And I think your preparation is really important, right? And you need to think about interviewing as being the application season as being a part-time job. You have to be really set aside time for it. And so each school you apply to, or each school you get an interview at, you need to go through their website, figure out what do they pride themselves on, what do they think is important, because they'll feature that in their website, and be able to ask questions about that. Because we're trying to decide, if we think you're going to be a good fit for our school, and you seem to be enthusiastic about it, or are we just one of 20 MD PhD programs you applied to, and you don't show much interest in it. I will tell you one thing: if you've already applied this year, it's probably too late. But in your if you have a secondary application from a school, it helps to mention something about specific researchers at that school, or specific kind of research that school is good in. That's something that the reviewers will note when they're reviewing your application. And if you do include that in your application, so I'm really interested in working with doctors so and so and so and so, then I think that shows you put a little bit of extra effort into your preparation for applying, and it does help us to make a decision about how serious we think you are about our school.
I think my answer also would probably go to one of the questions that I see in the chat, is like, how do you distinguish a mediocre interview from a stellar one? I think preparation, as everyone before me has commented on, I think that's absolutely, we can tell if somebody has prepared for that interview with that school, with that interviewer, or not. So that's pretty evident to us. The other thing I would say is, before you start down this road, is to do like an honest sort of self-evaluation about how you actually interview. Interviewing is really all about personal communication and personal connection. And if you have trouble with that, either in person, virtual, or both, go with a trusted mentor or a trusted friend or family member. Find a way to understand where are your hitches and how to overcome those. Because if you can't communicate or connect with us, that's really going to distinguish, the mediocre interviews from the ones where we make a really wonderful personal connection with someone that really wants to pull us, wants us to really draw and recruit that person to our program.
Great. All right. We're about halfway through. So I just wanted to make a brief announcement to those attendees who may have joined us a little bit later. Just want to remind everyone that this session will be recorded. And as you can see, we have a team of co-moderators who are pulling questions from the Q&A box, as well as Twitter and Daniel's email. And there is also an FAQ document produced by previous MD PhD director panelists, which is available to you, and Daniel will throw that into the chat, the link for that. Alrighty, so on to our second half. We've been getting a bunch of questions in through the Q&A about the timing of interviews. So could you please comment on how and if interview timing may impact the applicant's acceptance success, or how that might reflect interest from the school? And I'd also just throw in as a secondary question to that. I know last year, the timing of interviews was sort of a little bit off from previous cycles due to the pandemic. And so if you might speak a little bit to how the timing is looking for this year for your program.
So I'm going to guess that every program is going to give you a different answer. So it's certainly appropriate to try to find out when a program makes its decisions. Our program doesn't have rolling admissions, so we basically notify all of our interviewed applicants in middle to end of February about whether they've been accepted or not. And it's really rough for the people who come for interviews early on to sort of be on tenterhooks that entire time. So we appreciate that, and we try to reassure people that we haven't forgotten them. As far as I know, many programs will try to fill their interview slots early, and so it's important to have your application ready and in early. We're one of the programs that explicitly doesn't offer all of our interview slots until we have read every application that came in by the deadline. And so our interviews start in November and run into the very beginning of February. And it doesn't mean anything if you haven't been offered an interview until basically Thanksgiving or December. And that's in part because we also work with some PhD departments which are making decisions about social science applicants. And so we don't want to fill all our interview slots until we've heard from those PhD folks around Thanksgiving.
Yes, and so our, Barbara, we set aside interview slots until we read all of our applications. We start interviewing at the beginning of October and run through early January. In terms of acceptances, those go out on a rolling basis, mid-November, mid-December, and then every 2 weeks beginning in January. We hope to have all of our interviews, all the acceptances out by the first week of February. And then we have a short wait list that we may draw from. It just depends on how things go in a particular year, whether or not we would go to a wait list.
We engage in rolling admissions and rolling interviews. We interview in October, November, January, and February. And when I started taking over, when I started chairing admissions for Wisconsin, I was actually really interested in what was the timing and what was the actual impact. So I actually went back into our historical records and did a little study, private study. And for us, it actually had no impact in terms of the composition of our class and when you interviewed and when you actually got your invitation and all of that. So, for certain programs, I think most programs, I would generally say, really, whether or not they do it like Yale and WashU or like us, we're very cognizant that great applications come at all different times during the process, and great applications come to us from a lot of different corners, from a lot of different people doing a lot of different things. I know that it would also probably be safe to say that all of us here really strive to have strong scientific, socioeconomic, racial, diversity in our programs. And the best way we do that is we mentally either accord those things at the end, or as we go through the year, we are very diligent about sort of accounting for who we have and where we have, and making sure we do that. So I know the general recommendation is to get it in and get it fast and get it early. But at least based on our institutional data, it doesn't matter.
So we are very different than the other three institutions because our program is very small. And it's a new program, we have a very small pool of applicants that we receive. So therefore we wait until the deadline is met, and then we evaluate all of the applicants at the same time, and then we begin our interviews. And the students need to be accepted first into the DO program before they can be considered for the PhD. So we have to wait until those interviews are done first and acceptances have taken place by the DO for the DO degree before we get the applications, and then we focus. But we wait until the deadline is done, and then we evaluate all applicants at the same time. Again, we don't get a lot of applicants. We are a new program, so it works for us really nicely.
All right, we're going to jump back a little bit to sort of the content of the interview itself. A number of people have been asking, in the scenario where students have been involved with multiple research experiences, in their interview, is it better for them to talk in depth about one particular type of research or particular project that they've worked on, or to talk about sort of the full range?
So, and I guess I have two answers to the question. One is, we do have this committee interview, and you have 20 minutes with the committee. You only have time to talk about one project, and so we encourage you to pick one project, the one you believe that you can talk about the best, and start talking about it. It's not a presentation, so there are no PowerPoints or handouts or using the whiteboard. It's just you start talking, they start asking questions. And so I would really drill down, figure out what is you think your best work is, or the work you can explain the best and have a best discussion on, and focus on that. When you're talking to different faculty, those are two-way, and they're going to tell you about their research, and presumably you're interested in their research. That's why you asked to see them. So you really need to be able, to converse in that, and it could be related to your work or not. But also they're going to ask you about your research. I would say when you're talking to those faculty, you should maybe tailor the researcher going to talk about to what they're doing, because they can then make the best assessment in terms of your knowledge and your facility in discussing that particular topic.
I think actually having multiple research experiences it's actually really hard to communicate that to a committee. I know at Wisconsin, one thing that we really look for are really sustained, prolonged research experiences with a single laboratory and a PI. There are a multitude of reasons for that, which I don't have time to go into. And so when we see an applicant with multiple shorter experiences, one thing that we really are interested in is why did that happen and why did you choose to do that? And then what's the common thread between them? Right? If you are working with a medical anthropologist and then you were working with a political scientist and then you were working in a CRISPR lab, we're going to be like, this isn't really clicking for us. But if you can tell us about a narrative story and why things tied together are, that's okay too. And again, it's just about being genuine and communicating sort of your scientific journey.
I think also it depends on the questions that you're asked. Maybe a particular faculty member in the committee might ask you a question about one type of research, but yet another member of the committee might ask you a question on the other type of research. So I find this happens all the time when students have multiple types of research and you have multiple faculty during the interview, they do ask about each project. If you just happen to have only one project, then obviously we focus on that. But otherwise, I think it depends on the question that gets asked.
And maybe I could finish by adding to Michael's point that you should be careful. I mean, we sometimes see students write every little possible thing that they have done. And it's possible that some faculty member will really be interested in trying to, figure out what you did right here with this person 3 years ago because you highlighted it in your application. So you have to be prepared to talk about everything that's in your application. So, think carefully. And if you're given the opportunity, you can tell the faculty interviewer, I have 2 projects, one that I worked on as an undergraduate, one that I'm working on now as a postbac. In roughly these areas, which would you like me to tell you more about? They may say the one you're most excited about, or the one, or they'll pick. So just everything you wrote in your application, you own. So be prepared.
I think that's really helpful advice. I think some of you have touched on this a bit already, but our applicants would like to know a little bit more about what type of research experiences are really necessary for them to have had in order to be able to speak in the way that you all would like to see in an interview. Could you just characterize that a little bit more?
Is it my turn to go first? Isn't that the $64,000 question? I think it's really hard to prospectively prescribe exactly what that research experience should be. I think most of us here have seen the really interesting study that was shared at the Great Study Group from Einstein that was done this past year, where they talked about what types of research experiences students had in their program before they came in, and then what were their actual outcomes from the program. And I think the one thing that I was really surprised with was that it actually is hugely varied. Going to the NIH and doing a IRTA for 2 to 3 years is not always a prescription for success as a scientist. Coming right out of undergrad with only a full year with a PI, some students I've seen in Wisconsin and elsewhere, they've been truly outstanding and wonderful. So I think really the thing about your research experience is you need to be able to communicate again to us why it was impactful, what you learned from it, and why that it's a significant motivating factor for you to pursue a physician scientist career.
I agree, that's a very valid point. And also it depends again in the program that you're coming in and what are the interests of the faculty members that are part of the program. If, let's say, the majority of the faculty members in that particular program, at least I can speak for our program that's very small, we have almost virtually all of our scientists are basic scientists, right? So they're bench type of research. So clearly, that's an advantage if you have that. On the other hand, of course, we look for diversity and we look for individuals with other types of research, whether it's bioinformatics or even, but let's say if you come in with a heavy clinical type of research into a basic type of department or program, that's going to be a little hard. And the other important point to remember is that these are accelerated programs, right? This is not your typical 6-year PhD where you have time to learn a lot of the techniques and spend a couple of years, learning all this stuff, right? In some respects, we want you to hit the ground running, as they say. So if you come in with a set of technical skills that are highly applicable to that particular program that you're applying, you're going to be ahead of the game.
I think for us, the research experience has a sort of twofold importance. One is it helps us figure out if you have, I'll call it the personal characteristics or traits that we think are necessary for science. And a lot of that has to do with being able to find joy and excitement in small successes in a background sometimes of very boring drudgery and, disappointment. And doing a longer experience, I think, often gives people the chance to really go through that process. So it goes beyond you're doing something that somebody else thought of that is for a short time. So you really may not be able to really succeed, or you may never experience that sort of abysmal failure and how you feel about it. I think, to the point about the length of your experience is not necessarily going to, sort of bode like a faster PhD or a more successful career. But for us, I think it's important to do enough research that you really figure out if this is something you like, because there are some people who like it and for whom, it's impossible to almost think of not doing it. And there are others who are like, yeah, I can do this, but, actually the sooner I can leave it behind, the better. This isn't really what I want to do. And we just want you to know that as much as you can for yourselves before you enter into this program.
Yeah, and JP mentioned earlier this study that was done out of by Miles Akavis and Skip Brass about research backgrounds and outcomes, and it really, it was striking that there's no predictive value in terms of how much research experience you've had before getting into an MD PhD program. But we've seen, over the last 25 years, when I started, we had maybe 7% of our applicants who were, not applying as college seniors. Now it's closer to 70%. So it's increased tenfold in that time. And on the one hand, it does allow us we have more evidence on which to make our decision about whether or not we want to interview someone. But the applicant, as Barbara mentioned, has more of an idea about whether or not they really want to pursue this pathway. And so I think what's happened is, on our side, what we've seen is the attrition rate, that is the number of individuals that do not complete the program, has dropped significantly. National average used to be over 15%. Now I think it's probably hovering around 6 or 7%. So it does have that side benefit. But the problem is as a student or as an individual, instead of starting a program at age 22, you might be 25 or even older. And that's, we are starting to talk about not so much time to degree, but that's important as well, but also age to degree, because it is a lot to ask somebody who might be 30 years old to commit to an 8-year program, and then 3 years of residency, 3 years of fellowship, and so on.
Thank you. So often at the end of an interview or in the course of an interview, the applicant will have a chance to ask questions of the person interviewing them. And so what types of questions would you recommend the applicant might ask in order to try and determine the fit they have with the program, whether the program would be a good fit for them?
That's an excellent question. I think one of the questions that we typically get is, how many students are in the program? How are the students, in what laboratories are they placed? The type of research that they do. These are the kind of questions we get. Sometimes they talk about the curriculum. They ask questions about the curriculum. Sometimes they ask questions about the research rotations that they have to do. And they also ask sometimes questions about the finances. So will their tuition for medical school and graduate school, and will they get a stipend, and how much is the stipend? Sometimes they do come up these questions, and they're fine. And deadlines, right? When will I know, and stuff like that.
I think some of the questions you might ask of your interviewers, apart from always you can ask them about their science, and most scientists will be happy to drone on and on and on about what they do. But you might ask them if what they particularly appreciate about the town where you're going to think about living for 8 years, about the aspects of, working with the other faculty or with students that they, maybe excite them and keep them at that institution. You might ask them what they think are the particular strengths of that MD PhD program or that scientific department. Or what are their weaknesses, just to flip around some of those questions that we were saying we'd ask you.
Yeah, those are all great. And I would actually maybe just throw in something a little bit different. You should ask students about the program. Why did they pick Yale or Washington University or wherever? Why, and also, if they have a problem, who do they go to? Is there somebody in the program that they can talk with, that they feel comfortable with? And the thing about the MD PhD programs, we don't grant degrees. We don't grant the MD degree. We don't grant the PhD degrees. Those are handled by someone else. So our job isn't to, evaluate you strictly and decide whether or not you get to stay or not, or deal with that. Our job really is to support you. And so that's what you want to get a sense from the program is, are you going to be supportive of me, when I'm in the program? Not that I plan to cause any trouble for you, but, what if you're going to be in a program for 8 years, life happens in 8 years, parents die, things happen, you get married, or your relationship ends, or you have a child, things are going to happen. And so you want to know that the program is going to be supportive of you through all those challenging times you'll face.
And basically to springboard off of what Brian just said, as hard as it actually might seem at this point in the game, we are actually trying to recruit you as well to our programs. And for better or for worse, you're also interviewing us and trying to figure out if we're a good fit for you. And so ask questions that are personally important to you. Think about the questions that you might ask that really speak to, as both Barbara and Brian talked about, the culture of the program. What are the support, when I went on my residency and MSDP interviews, I had a set question that I always asked that really was my question that really gave me insight into the culture of the program and the department and the institution. And so always think about fit for you too, because as Brian said, it's 8 years. It's a long time. Life happens, and they're going to be really, high highs and some really low lows. And you want to be in a place that's going to be supportive for all of that. So.
I'll just add that often, having gone through the virtual interview process myself last year, many programs are, in addition to your formal interviews, organizing different events and Q&A sessions with current students as well as program directors. And so I think that's another great opportunity for you to ask questions. And I'd really encourage any current applicants, really wherever you are in the application process, to try and talk to current students at any of the programs that you're interested in, because I think you can get a lot of very valuable insight from talking with the students. All right, so post-interview, what thoughts do you have on post-interview communications, things like thank you letters, and then later on in the process, perhaps letters of interest or letters of intent? So how to stay engaged, I guess, with the program after your interview.
That's a great point. I think that if one were interviewing for a job, right, it would be very important to send a letter to your interviewer thanking them for taking the time to speak to you. And we do find that our interviewers notice when an applicant has followed up, and sometimes it's a simple thank you. Sometimes it's a sort of follow up to a question that was asked, or sort of further engagement in the conversation. And our interviewers will bring this up. I think that in some regards, we're trying to figure out if you're actually interested in our program. And so these are signals to us that especially if they're genuine, that you really are, that there's been some sort of connection, and you're thinking our program is a good fit for you. I know that many of you will write letters to every program where you've interviewed saying you're interested. And sometimes when you're reading that, it kind of comes through. So if you're going to write a letter, make it meaningful. Most students don't.
Right, I would agree with that. I think we don't see many letters or communications that come back from individuals after they've been interviewed. And I would agree, make it meaningful. Talk about specifics about why that program is a good fit for you. What did you see there that you really think would make it the place where you want to do your training? And I'm just going to throw in something here because I'm on the administrative side. I'm not a scientist, as I said. It's okay to express your appreciation to the administrators of the program as well. We don't make the decisions, but we do talk with the directors, and they will ask our opinion about applicants sometimes. And if we can say, we really enjoy this applicant, because we're going to be with you for 8 years. And so if we get bad vibes about it, it's like, well, do we really want to have to deal with this for the next 8 years? And so I think it's important that anybody you come in contact with, you don't have to do follow-up letters, but just realize that you're always on. You're always interviewing, even if you're talking to. Actually, we had this case of a cab driver who came into our building and told us he dropped the interview off and whatnot. Anyway, he came and he said, "Don't admit this guy. He had nothing but bad things to say about St. Louis and Washington University, and he was talking about all the other great places he interviewed." And so, be nice to the cabbies even, right?
Brian is absolutely right, because the administrators are essentially the heart and soul of our program. Like, we would fall into shambles without our co-administrators. So they're a huge part of our program. I think the best advice is just to be genuine. I think all of us can see a genuine note versus just something that you hit out on your iPhone as you were at your gate trying to take off after the interview. Like, we can tell the difference between those and a genuine note. And it's kind of like, you just want to put the right karma out there, and you want to treat people the way you want to be treated. So don't tell Wisconsin, Yale, and WashU that we're all your #1 program and you would definitely come if you were accepted. Like, there's no real reason to do that, because there are other students out there who actually have true motivations for wanting to be in New Haven or in St. Louis because of family or for whatever other reason. So, be genuine, be empathetic. It's a tough process for you and for everyone. So I think just being like a good sort of citizen will go a long way in the whole process.
I agree. I think the letter is very important. And as Dr. Sullivan said, not many students do send thank you letters, and it would be nice to do that. I think it shows, that your professionalism. As Barbara also said, that if you're applying for a job, you're also going to send out a thank you note after you had your interview. So this is the same thing, right? So you have to show your professionalism. Also, the letter should be written in a professional manner as well. Sometimes you get letters with as if it was a text, and that does not look good on behalf of the candidates, right? So in my case, I happen to be the administrator and the program director, so I get everything. And I also happen to be the chair of the admissions committee as well. So it's good to get a letter saying thank you.
I think Michael needs some help.
I see we had a quick question sort of following up on that about just the time frame or frequency of follow-up of those types of communications. Is there sort of a point where it becomes too much?
Yeah, and I think, initially you do after the interview, right? And you would, and you have to send it to everybody you interviewed with, the people you really connected with. I think that those are the ones you have the most meaningful communication. And then depending, something like we do rolling, a lot of other programs, they make all their decisions in February or March. So, you have to sort of consider the timing. I would, if you interview in like September or October and you do a follow, thank you, then, and then, if you do the follow-up, a couple weeks in advance when decisions are being made, I think that that's probably a sort of a good strategy. But I'd be interested to hear about, other programs that maybe don't do rolling, how they handle that.
Go ahead, Barbara.
I was just going to say, since we don't roll, something that I'll often see is a student will send a letter. It'll go into their application that will basically say, I'm, wanted to give you an update. This paper has been accepted. I've been able to, give a poster on my research. I'm very excited. And I'm, still very interested in your program. And so it sort of communicates interest, but also sometimes provides information that lets us know a student is continuing to be successful.
Nothing to add.
So for us, basically, we are the same way. We don't have rolling admissions. So, and during the interview, we tell the students exactly when we're going to inform them, and therefore they know. And occasionally, and it's not a long period of time when we interview and then we inform them of our decision. So we don't really get a lot of follow-up letters either.
Thank you. All right, so we're nearing the end of our time. So to wrap things up, there's one last question that a lot of people have been very curious about, which is, what are your thoughts on what the interview process is going to look like in future years? Do you anticipate that the process will continue to be largely virtual for your program?
I'll go then. Yeah, so we've had a lot of success with the virtual interviews, and we are seriously considering about making it a regular part of our process. We do realize that making a trip to where we're going to spend 7 or 8 years is important. And so what we're doing this year is we're actually setting up visits for accepted applicants, groups of accepted applicants beginning in January. So we'll have one in January, one in February, one in March, and then we'll have in mid-April a visit for everybody who's been accepted at the same time. And so I think in the future, we may very well stick with virtual interview format. It's going to depend what our peers are doing, though, because we don't want to be too different from our peers.
I think the one thing that we definitely saw last year with the virtual format is we were able to cast, a much wider net and interview a much broader, cohort of students than we probably typically have. And that's across almost every single socioeconomic diversity and scientific measure that you might sort of throw the book at. So just like Washi was doing, I think we are also seriously maintaining virtual. But then also trying to make the second visit an in-person event so people can come to Madison, see that we're a lot more than just snow and cold, and see the lake and, do all the fun stuff. So yeah, so I think we're looking at a similar compromise like Brian and Washi is.
So for us, because the students have to be admitted into the DO program first, they already have come to the campus and they've actually seen the campus. So they've had a visit. So we will probably continue with the virtual. There's no need for us to bring them back again, so they can see the same stuff again. So we'll continue with the Zoom interviews. It works very nicely and it's very efficient as well.
I'm really not sure what we're going to do. I think there are so many advantages to applicants of having virtual interviews. It's easier and it doesn't cost as much, and no one's worn out traveling all over and getting blizzarded in New Haven or in Wisconsin. But I think also that, one thing we're sensitive to is many of you on the call have a visual image of what it's like to be in San Francisco or in New York City or in Boston. You say New Haven to most people, and I'm not sure that they really appreciate how interesting a place it is. And so for us, we'd like to bring people to campus for their interviews, because we think that the virtual interview just doesn't capture many things that are important for you as you're making up your mind about your next 7 or 8 years. But again, this is kind of a moving target, so we'll see where we end up.
Great. Thank you so much to all of our panelists for their time. And thank you especially also to all of our applicants and attendees who made this session very interactive for us all. Thank you also to so many other people, including the APSA Diversity Ad Hoc Committee, PR Partnerships Committees, Gabby, Eunice, Michael, and the other APSA leadership that not only put these sessions together, but have also worked very hard to make sure that our UIM applicants received word of these sessions as well. We are currently in the process of planning our calendar for upcoming interactive sessions, so please stay tuned via social media and emails, and we hope you'll be able to join us again. So thank you so much, everyone, and have a good night.
Thank you as well.
Thank you. Best wishes to you all.
Thank you.